Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We are looking at a truly fascinating cultural and philosophical artifact today. It's a 2021 essay penned by an author named Xu Feng, titled The Magical Power of Faith and Hope. And what makes this document so compelling is how it starts out with this deeply universal human problem, the sheer massive scale of global suffering, and then attempts to offer a highly specific and honestly quite radical blueprint for solving it. Now, our goal today isn't to judge or endorse this blueprint, but rather to just neutrally unpack the structure of the author's argument. We're going to break down how the text moves from globally recognized data to dramatic real-world survival stories, and finally to a sweeping utopian proposition. So let's look at the foundation of the author's argument. To really understand the author's proposed solution, we first have to wrap our heads around the scale of the problem exactly as he defines it. According to the essay, drawing on 2019 data from the World Health Organization, an average of 800,000 people commit suicide globally every single year. But the text goes even further, pointing out that suicide attempts are actually 20 times that number. By calculating that each tragic event profoundly impacts at least 4 other individuals, Schafing arrives at a pretty staggering figure: 64 million. That means 64 million people worldwide every single year are thrown into extreme suffering just from the localized impacts of suicide and suicide attempts alone. It's a heavy, deeply sobering statistic, and the author uses it to anchor his premise that a huge portion of humanity has fundamentally lost its sense of hope. Now, what's really interesting here is how the author scales up that initial pain point. Shofeng argues that suicide is really just the tip of the iceberg. When you factor in the daily, crushing realities of global diseases, deeply entrenched poverty, ongoing conflicts, wars, and natural disasters, the number of humans living in a state of suffering just skyrockets. The text posits that it's no exaggeration to say that up to 3 billion people, we're talking nearly half the global population, live in pain every single year. The sheer magnitude of this number is meant to really impress upon the reader that the current systems governing human life are fundamentally failing a massive portion of our species. So faced with this immense, almost incomprehensible level of global pain, the essay outlines its core thesis. The author insists that humanity absolutely cannot turn a blind eye to this suffering. We can't just accept it as the unavoidable cost of doing business on planet Earth. Instead, the text argues that we must actively liberate people from this pain. And the ultimate path to this liberation? Well, it isn't a new technology, it's not a financial policy or a medical breakthrough. According to Xu Feng, the ultimate miraculous power that can break this cycle is simply faith and hope. And to prove that these aren't just empty buzzwords, the author provides 2 extreme real-world examples to demonstrate their literal life-saving mechanics. The first piece of evidence takes us right into the aftermath of a devastating earthquake in Los Angeles. The text paints a terrifying scenario. Children are trapped beneath the rubble in total darkness, with the horrific reality of their situation pressing in on them from all sides. But in the absolute midst of this disaster, one child remembers a promise made by his father. "No matter what happens, I will be with you." The author highlights this single powerful sentence as the catalyst for survival. Because of it, the son's unwavering belief became simply, "My father will come to save me." Because of that one father's promise, we arrive at this incredible outcome: 14. That is the number of children who were ultimately rescued after being trapped for 36 agonizing hours. The author argues that the core factor behind their rescue wasn't just physical endurance. It was actually the psychological contagion of hope. That one child's unshakable belief that rescue was coming quite literally infected the other 13 children. It acted as a psychological shield, helping the entire group survive that incredibly dangerous, life-threatening period of fear and despair until help finally arrived. Let's see how this builds with the author's second dramatic example of resilience. This timeline maps out the harrowing events of the 2010 San Jose copper mine collapse in the northern deserts of Chile. 33 miners were trapped an incredible 700 meters underground. On the surface, their fate was completely unknown. Below ground, they found a shelter, but get this, it only had enough food for 2 to 3 days. Yet they somehow stretched that meager supply, surviving on literally just 2 spoonfuls of canned fish per person per day for a full 17 days before contact was made, and they endured a total of 69 days underground before being safely rescued. Xu Feng asks a vital question: how on earth did they survive? The essay's definitive answer is that it was the mechanics of faith and hope keeping their physical bodies going. By analyzing these two famous survival stories, the author draws a universal psychological conclusion. In times of absolute, total despair, as long as one holds on to faith and hope, there is a distinct chance to transform danger into safety. The text uses these stories to establish a universally relatable foundation. I mean, we all understand the primal will to survive, right? We all respect the immense psychological fortitude of those trapped miners and children. By getting us to agree on the life-saving power of hope in extreme physical situations, the author perfectly prepares the ground for the next phase of the essay. And here is where the author's argument takes a really fascinating turn. Having established that faith and hope are miraculous survival tools, the text suddenly shifts gears. It moves completely away from universally accepted secular stories of survival and pivots into introducing a highly specific, modern, and localized movement. The author essentially tells the reader, hey, if you want to see the greatest modern example of this survival mechanism in action today, you need to look at this specific group. That group is known as Life Chanyuan, and its members are referred to in the text as the Chanyuan Celestials. The essay introduces them as a collective of over 100 ordinary people who, starting in 2009, decided to live together following what the author describes as a communist model. The text presents this specific community as the contemporary world's absolute best example of maintaining hope in the face of relentless adversity. And to prove this, Shufang details the severe logistical and financial hardships this group has endured over the last decade. According to the essay, the history of Life Chanyuan is essentially a relentless 11-year cycle of building up and being displaced. Over the years, they initially built 3 idyllic homes in Yunnan province. However, stating it was due to the government's lack of understanding, they were driven out, which resulted in the massive loss of over 20 million yuan in property. But they didn't stop. They built a home in Nanjing and were evicted. They created 3 homes in Xinjiang and were evicted again. They returned to Yunnan, built 3 more homes, and were forced out yet again. The text notes their funds were completely exhausted and they genuinely felt there was no place for them in the world. Yet they persisted, eventually expanding internationally to rebuild in Thailand with support from local temple abbots and even in Canada despite pandemic delays. And this brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic Xufeng really wants us to focus on: the stark, undeniable contrast between the group's physical reality and their internal psychological state. Externally, they were in absolute dire straits. Their funds were decimated, they were repeatedly displaced, and years of material work were repeatedly undone. Yet internally, the text claims they experienced absolutely zero despair. Their faith remained entirely unshaken. They just never stopped moving forward. Much like those miners trapped underground, they survived a crushing external environment through immense internal hope. But we have to ask, what exactly was fueling this specific hope? The essay outlines the specific philosophical and religious pillars that kept Life Chanyuan from vanishing entirely. You see, their resilience wasn't just generic optimism, it was actually highly structured. First, they hold a firm belief that the greatest creator will not abandon them. Second, they place a deep trust in the justice of the Tao. Third, regarding those repeated evictions, they maintain a belief that the government's actions are merely a temporary misunderstanding and that eventually their lawful communal lifestyle is going to be permitted. And finally, the text claims their hope is fueled by a profound understanding of cosmic secrets, literally the mechanics of the universe, time, space, and life itself. These are the specific tenets that Shufang argues act as their unbreakable survival mechanism. Having established Life Chanyuan as the ultimate proof of concept for surviving hardship through faith, the author arrives at his final macro proposition. The essay argues that the practical experience of this small group isn't just meant for them, it is actually a profound understanding meant for everyone. The big proposition is that the entire human race needs to embark on this exact path. Shufang suggests that if all of humanity simply adopts this Shufang-style communist form of production and living, the vast systemic pain of the entire world can be cured. So the crucial point is this remarkably bold, highly quantifiable claim. Remember those 800,000 annual suicides we discussed right at the beginning? Well, the text states that if humanity enters into the Life Chanyuan path, those 800,000 annual suicides will drop to 0. Literally 0. Furthermore, the suffering of the hundreds of millions or even billions of people worldwide will not only be alleviated, but according to the essay, it may actually disappear entirely. The author is positioning this highly specific communal lifestyle as the literal, foolproof antidote to global despair. The essay then closes with a passionate, definitive demand for humanity's trust.
The text essentially calls for the entire human race to embrace one single faith, that this specific movement can rescue people from the sea of suffering. It leaves the reader with a massive, sweeping promise. As long as Life Channel One exists, the beautiful life that humanity dreams of will undoubtedly come. It is a massive ideological leap, going from the universal stories of fathers saving sons in earthquakes, all the way to asserting that a single communal movement holds the exclusive key to ending human suffering.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with a pretty vital question to ponder. We've seen how the author masterfully weaves together undeniable global pain, deeply moving stories of human survival, and a highly specific ideological solution. But as focused learners, we have to look at the structure of this argument objectively and ask, can a single utopian blueprint truly resolve the vast, deeply entrenched complexities of global human suffering? Does the resilience of a small, dedicated group actually translate into a scalable model for billions of incredibly diverse individuals? It's a fascinating intersection of human psychology, utopian ambition, and our universal desire to be free from pain. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this intriguing text, and I really encourage you to keep questioning how we, as a global society, construct our hope.